The first time I opened the archive from the old startup, I expected a bunch of mislabeled x rays and corrupted files. What I didn't expect to see was a skull with a second jaw sitting neatly on top of the first, teeth overlapping like someone had tried to stack two faces in one head. I stared for a long time. Then I wrote a note to myself, probably a test composite. That was how I handled most things at Veriscan Imaging. Assume there was a rational explanation, write a neat little label so I could live with it and move on. I got hired here 2 years ago as a senior program analyst. Veriscan had recently purchased a defunct health tech startup, Syngenic Labs, and inherited a mountain of unlabeled data. Synthetic radiology, generative models, the usual AI for medical breakthroughs, hand-waving. My job was simple on paper, at least. Audit the old training images so we could decide which to keep and which to discard before importing everything into our new software product. It sounded dull. I didn't mind dull. Dull meant nobody bled if I messed up. The first folder I opened in the Syngenic archive was called sim_ref_edge. It held what were supposed to be reference edge cases, rare but plausible pathology samples, the kind you use to teach a system where normal ends and abnormal begins. The files inside looked almost normal at first. One x-ray of a leg had a faint shadow behind the real tibia, like the bone had been duplicated or double exposed. Another showed ribs pointed inward, but way too sharply. The skull's teeth were lined in perfect symmetry. Not impossible, but uncanny. Then I noticed every single tooth was identical. No molars, no incisors, just the same tooth. Dozens of times. Old generative models made weird mistakes. That's what I told myself. I shrugged, tagged them as review minor anomalies, and scrolled. Then came the file that changed everything. A leg x-ray with 3 kneecaps. Not one big mess, not an injury, not a malformed joint. 3 neat, round kneecaps aligned along the same vertical axis, spaced with eerily precise gaps, as if someone had installed extra joints just to see what would happen. I checked the metadata. No history, no name, no age. Just a synthetic flag and an old Syngenic internal reference ID. I scrolled further. A shin bone with 3 identical copies of itself stacked inside the leg, as though someone duplicated the bone in software but forgot to hide the layers. A femur lined internally with tiny, evenly spaced teeth arranged in a curve like the inside of a mouth. My hands went cold. These weren't glitches. They were deliberate, or at least deliberate seeming, outputs from a generative model left unsupervised, allowed to invent and reinvent the human skeleton without anyone telling it no. I opened the next folder, sim_synth_edge. It was worse. A skull missing half of its left side, yet the teeth on that side floated in clean formation, their roots visible against empty air as if bone were just an optional background. A torso with 2 spines, perfectly parallel, running side by side from the base of the neck to the pelvis before vanishing into static. A chest where the ribs grew inward like hooks, their curves bending sharply toward where the lungs should be. Then, a skull with the nose cavity filled entirely with small, smooth baby teeth, packed edge to edge like a jar of pebbles. Another full body x ray where the spine looped into a perfect circle, vertebrae fused end to end like a wheel rim nestled in the abdomen. I felt sick. I checked the metadata again. Each image referenced healthcare IDs used for training. Syngenic had bought small anonymized sets from practices all over the country. Through the file name soup, you could make out some of the coding. Synth underscore 4722 underscore Bluemont, synth underscore 7714 underscore Keller, synth underscore 9180 underscore Oak underscore Ridge. All of these locations had provided anonymized samples years before Syngenic folded. No wrongdoing, just vendors buying data to build their model. But suddenly I could see it. Real x-rays from people coming in, and these things coming out. Descendants, not clones. The generative model had taken pieces of their bones and teeth and drifted off into madness, recombining them into bodies that couldn't breathe, couldn't stand, couldn't even exist long enough to suffer if somehow brought to life. It bothered me that the files didn't feel random. Even in the worst images, there was a kind of intent, not intelligence, but consistency. Like whatever generated them kept circling back to the same handful of obsessions. I started sorting the worst examples into groups, thinking maybe the patterns themselves would reveal how the model broke. That didn't help. It made everything worse. There was a whole cluster I labeled symmetry errors. These were the ones where bodies were mirrored across impossible axes, a chest cavity with two hearts. Each one rotated a few degrees in opposite directions like mismatched wheels. A pelvis split down the center, right and left halves fused backward as if the model couldn't decide which way humans actually faced. One scan showed a spine branching, a literal fork, two columns of vertebrae rising from a single base and rejoining at the neck like braided rope. Another group I named additive drift. That's where the model kept adding anatomical features, as if it thought the problem with humans was that we don't have enough bones. A forearm containing 4 perfect ulna copies, each smaller than the last, nested like Russian dolls. A rib cage with twice the normal number of ribs, stacked so tightly they looked like insect armor. Skull overgrown with ghost bone. Faint outlines of previous attempts layered into the final shape, as if the model kept changing its mind and forgot to erase its drafts. The worst folder, the one that made me push away from the desk, was the set I eventually titled Invasions. These were the images where the generative process seemed to drag features from one part of the body into another, mixing structures the way a half-trained artist confuses reference photos. One chest x-ray showed the outline of a second mouth stamped across the lungs, complete with incisors facing outward like a grin pressed against glass. Another image placed a kneecap in the throat. Not as if someone swallowed it. This was grown there, anchored to nothing, hovering in the soft tissue like a misplaced joint. The image I closed immediately, then opened again because I didn't trust my own shock, showed a torso with a spinal column curled inside the ribcage like a sleeping animal, head tucked near where the stomach should be. The original spine was still there. This was a second one, generated whole. I remember staring at the monitor, realizing that none of these bodies were broken in the human sense. They were broken the way a machine breaks, drifting off its training data, hallucinating structure, inventing solutions where no problem exists. And then the real fear hit me. What if these images weren't the result of corruption? What if they were the result of improvement? If the model had been abandoned mid-training, if no one ever stopped its recursive attempts to enhance the datasets, if each grotesque body represented not failure, but iteration, then these weren't mistakes at all. They were versions, refinements, drafts of bodies that never existed, but that the system believed should. When that thought formed, slowly, heavily, like a bruise blooming, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. A sense that something enormous and blind was moving in the dark, and I had just accidentally touched its skin. I did what I was supposed to do. I filed a ticket. I said these images are corrupted, biologically impossible, unsuitable for any training process. I wrote, attaching a handful of the worst examples, carefully redacting clinic IDs. I flagged it as high severity. I expected at least a little horror, maybe a call, maybe someone from compliance messaging me, asking if this was some kind of joke. Instead, the ticket got reassigned, then reassigned again, then closed with a single line. It said legacy artifacts, please ignore. I reopened it, escalated it again, linked more examples. I highlighted the Oak Ridge ID, the multiple clinics, the clear pattern that these weren't random corruption. No one responded. I sent a direct message to my manager, Lee. Later, he called me into a conference room, shut the door, and sat down across from me with the careful patience of someone about to say something I wouldn't like. Look, he said, I read your ticket. And? I said. And you're outside of your scope. I stared at him. Outside my job is literally to audit inherited training data. Your job is to classify, he said, tag, not to evaluate the ethics of what Syngenic did 7 years ago. They didn't just mess up labeling, I said. They built a model that churned out anatomical horrors and tied them to real clinic IDs, and we're about to feed all that into our system. We are not, he said. We're not using legacy edge case sets in the production rollout. Everyone knows they're noisy. They're not noisy, I said, louder than I meant to. They're wrong. They're not even trying to be human. If any of this leaks, if any doctor sees even one of these mixed messages into their workflow, he cut me off. Nate pinched the bridge of his nose. Stop digging into the old Syngenic data. None of it's going into production. Just tag it and move on. That's not what the architecture document says, I said. Since we're consolidating all the data sets, he cut me off. Stop. Do what you're asked. Tag the files. Mark the ones that are clearly nonsense. Fine. But you're not the ethics board, and you're not in the deployment. This is not your problem to solve. He got up and left. The door clicked behind him. I sat there for a full minute, staring at the wood grain, feeling my heartbeat in my ears. I wasn't going to let these bodies out into the real world. I went back to my desk, opened our internal mirror server, a local copy of the Syngenic archive that fed our pre-processing pipeline, and manually deleted the worst folders. sim_ref_edge, sim_synth_edge, invasions, symmetry_errors, additive_drift. I didn't send them to the trash. I overwrote them. I purged their thumbnails. I cleaned the cache. I scrubbed as many traces as I could find. It took hours, lines of progress bars, my eyes burning. When I was done, I re-indexed the whole dataset. The directory tree shrank. The worst horrors vanished. The mirror was not clean, but cleaner. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted and shaking. And for the first time since I'd seen the 3-kneecapped leg, I felt like I'd done something right. And then, because I was tired and human and wanted to feel good about myself, I opened the new clean training build my coworkers had just exported to send to our pilot sites, just to admire my work. The build viewer loaded a neat list of samples. I double-clicked one at random, A leg. At first glance, perfectly normal. Nice contrast, a clear outline. Then I saw it. Inside the calf muscle, faint but undeniable. 3 tibias, blended, smoothed, standardized. The same impossible structure I had deleted earlier, but sharper, more realistic, its edges corrected, its noise reduced. It had survived. Not just survived, but been improved. My stomach turned. I backed out, opened another image. The chest x-ray this time. The ribs bent inward a little too far. Near the center, barely visible behind the heart, a curve of something that looked like vertebrae. Too many of them, nested like a second spine folding around the first. Another sample, a skull with one jaw, just one, but the shape of it tugged at me. I overlaid it mentally with the double jaw image that I had deleted. The arches matched. It was as if the model had averaged its own monstrosity into something almost plausible. Looking longer didn't help. Just faintly, I saw those same baby teeth, faintly lining the nose cavity. The blood rushed from my body and horror swept over me. I checked the export logs. Build shipped to pilot site 003 through pilot site 034, pilot site 045 through pilot site 077, and Wilmington General, Silver Forest Legacy, Grand Plains, Oak Ridge Legacy, archival sync only. It was too late. Our mirror server was just one node in a larger system. Deleting my copy hadn't destroyed anything. The originals lived in cloud backups, regional mirrors, personal dev environments. The new build had already pulled from the ones on those untouched sources. The worst of Syngenic's bodies, a whole silent population of impossible skeletons, had already been blended into the training set and shipped out under Veriscan's logo. I shut off my screen, every part of me buzzing with a useless urge to run. The next morning, when I tried to badge into the building, the light flashed red. My email wouldn't load on my phone. My VPN token failed. A few minutes later, I got a bland, automated notice on my personal account. Your role has been rescoped. Thank you for your contributions to Veriscan imaging. Please coordinate equipment return with HR. They didn't need to say it. I knew what it was. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching employees file in and out, wondering how many of them knew about the old Syngenic assets. How many of them would ever see the bodies I'd tried to erase? How many doctors would one day look at a scan, hesitate for half a second, and then shrug and trust the system? I had no access now, no proof. Just a memory of a circular spine, a skull full of teeth where sinuses should be, a leg with too many joints, and a log line tying those things to real clinics that had never asked to be part of any of this. I whispered the truth to no one. I deleted the originals, but the copies had already learned how to look real. The system wasn't broken. It was shipped. Somewhere out there, a real doctor is staring at one of my deleted images and trying to diagnose it. And they'll never know that I'm the one who tried to bury the evidence instead of the harm.